Hey, long time no overview. Man, a lot of these overviews have started like this recently, but meh, I have a life, so I gotta say, this summer has been pretty lit in terms of seasonals. Now, listen to me closely when I say lit. I said lit, not good. We have a lot of watchable, entertaining, and decent shows, and like 2 good ones so far, not including ReZero. So I'm going to move from the good shows to the okay shows, so the order I'm talking about each show in is its ranking. So let's get started with the sleeper, Battery. That wasn't a joke, don't call Battery boring, please. Battery's first 2 episodes have been very weird. While the first episode was fantastic in establishing characters' motivations, tone, and atmosphere, the second episode seemed a lot more vague than it should have been. A good example is the ending scene of episode 2 that happens before the credits. On the first watch, the scene seemed terribly put together, and some parts of it still are, like when Takumi falls into the pond and the water levels are inconsistent. That's a problem because they mention his life was at risk, but from what we saw, he walked out of the pond, meaning that the water wasn't deep. The scene didn't really have any meaning to it until my second watch of the episode. Takumi briefly grabs his pitching arm to stop it from being injured, which was a very subtle form of characterization that the opening of the series hints at when he's putting the baseball inside of his pocket. Takumi always has baseball on his mind and he takes it way too seriously, hence why he's taking a baseball with him on the first day of school in the opening and why he protected his arm when he was falling into the pond. Takumi is a very interesting character because he's hard to read. What I've gotten so far is that he's afraid of losing and that he's very insecure. I figured that much out with a couple of lines of his monologue, such as the I suck line and the pond scene. If you interpret the cherry tree as a symbol for fragility, which is why it's in the pond scene, and closely look at how the scene is shot, you'll realize that it's actually quite genius how the show can use such a small amount of words to convey a point. Takumi is very insecure and he sees himself as weak. All that being said, the show does have its fair share of problems. The animation isn't all that great, however I do like the art style. The dialogue is very repetitive and everyone is just acting really asshole-ish to those younger than them. I guess it made sense in some cases, and with Takumi's insecurity, I guess I can understand why he's so damn rude, but that doesn't excuse the show's repetitive dialogue. Better directing would help with things like this because this could be framed a lot differently every time, but the same point could be conveyed, so that nothing really feels stale. One positive thing I love, however, is how self-aware the show is at times, like when Takumi and Nakagura are throwing before dawn, and there's literally no one talking at all. And so later on in the episode, Nakagura references the scene and the awkwardness. The show knows what it's doing in terms of tone, and I really like that. Overall, Battery is the best new show of summer at the moment. I feel as if the show will be an 8 by the end, but only time will tell. Oh look, another show about time manipulation. We sure have gotten a lot of those this year. Oh wait! No, that's only 3 shows out of over 100, and each of them uses the premise much differently. Bang bang snob. Anyways, Orange is good. Orange is also very, very awkward. Did you like that awkward silence? There are many moments where I just ask myself, why is this even in the show? Until I realize that the scene was intentionally designed like that because life is awkward as hell. If you were to do things like tapping a girl on the head with a fist. Staring at a guy for 10 minutes seems pretty excessive, and it is excessive in real life. And awkward. I see what the show is doing in terms of tone, but what I'm really interested in is seeing how conflicted Naho will get with following the letter. The draw and conflict from the series will mainly draw from Naho's confliction with what the letter tells her to do and what she feels is right, and this will lead to some interesting things in the story in the present and in the future. Well, I guess technically it's the past, but whatever. Orange does a very good job of feeling very natural for the most part. Dialogue doesn't seem forced, and the few occasions where it is, it's purposefully done with the intention of awkwardness in mind. The characterization is nice. Characters don't just have one trait or personality to them for the most part, but they aren't particularly deep in terms of characterization or motivations. The group all feels like main characters, however I still feel as if only Naho, Suwa, and Kakeru are relevant, because they're the only ones whose scenes seem to be structured around. I say the others feel like main characters even though they aren't relevant because they are included in conversations and such, they just don't really have any impact on said scenes or the story. My biggest problem with Orange is that the characters don't seem as important as the screen time they're given. I hope more characters get more screen time, but overall, Orange is good. Naho's confliction between what she thinks is right and what she knows is right makes for an interesting conflict. However, not much else has happened so far. We'll have to wait and see where it goes from here. Now those were the two good shows. Now we go to the decent shows, starting with 91 Days. 91 Days is on the border of being a good show, but suffers from quite big issues. The way that names are thrown around without context leads to a lack of impact, and as a result, names feel more like buzzwords than actual threats. In Rara, when you heard about the blue squares and yellow scarves fighting, you knew that this was actually an issue because you've seen what the blue squares have done, and thus names actually had meaning. In 91 Days, however, it feels as if there are 3 families and we only know about one of them. The characterization of the villain, specifically Fango, is very weak. He's just a slippery asshole who looks just like the blonde guy from El Dorado, and that's about it. He's not interesting, and neither are most of the conflicts that happen in the story, or most of the characters that are actually in the story. For the most part, however, 91 Days looks nice and the tone is consistent. The characters, other than Angelo and Nero, aren't very interesting, but they aren't one-dimensional at the very least. The story feels much more mature than the PV had me to believe, and I'm happy about that. The pacing is never too slow and conflicts never feel rushed either. The show also uses the setting fairly decently, although I do hope that it uses it just a little more as we're now leaving the city the story started in, so I'm hoping the world building gets a little better. Not a bad show, it has its fair share of problems, but for the most part it's pretty solid. I predicted it'd be an above average show at the beginning of the season, and so far, I'm right. I'm always right. The best comedy of the season is Mob Psycho, although I'd argue it has some pretty steep competition in that genre this summer. I can't believe I'm saying this about anything coming from the author of One Punch Man, but this show is actually funny. I was worried after the first episode that the Salt and the Con Man jokes would be present throughout the whole series, but thank God they were almost non-existent in the second episode. The comedy looks as if it's not going to be repetitive, so I think I'll enjoy this one. I also like how the show is not just a comedy, it's also a coming-of-age story, and while it handles itself in a very goofy way, it delivers its thoughts on how youth should be spent in a way that's charming and relatable to the people in the audience such as me. I'm not saying that it's good because it's relatable, but I am saying that Mob Psycho is able to talk themes without losing what makes it so lovable. Not many shows can do that. Mob is also one of the highlights of the show. Unlike in One Punch Man, where Saitama doesn't really leave us with anything to explore past his backstory, Mob still has to develop and learn how he wants to live. He's coming to terms with who he is, and is thus a character I'm actually interested in watching. He's trying to find himself and how he wants to live his life. The best part about the show, however, is the budget. Mob Psycho looks gorgeous. It's easily the best looking show of this season. Yes, it looks better than Zestiria. The animation is super fluid, and when it's not, it's stylistically choppy and shots have more impact as a result. The fights are awesome, the show has a wide variety of colors used, and the shots are also very unique. There aren't many stills either, so the show is also very entertaining to look at. In conclusion, Mob Psycho is fun as hell. Watch it if you currently aren't, because you will like it. I'm almost positive of that. Even if you didn't like One Punch Man, just give this one a shot. It's not bad. One Punch Man sucks. I won't talk about Berserk very much because I believe it honestly deserves its own video, but what I will say about it is that it's not a fucking 1. Berserk is not worse than Akame ga Kill or Batum. It's an average show from episodes 1 to 3 and appears to be steadily rising as of episode 4, which went back to the story of being more about the characters than simply events happening. Berserk's strong suit has always been the characters. However, just because the staff took the focus off of said characters for 3 episodes doesn't mean the show is officially ass. I really needed to get that off my chest. The tone was more horror-like and the music was more metal rock-like than Berserk, but that doesn't mean it's bad. It's just not how Berserk usually is. That does not mean the product is bad, it just means it's not Berserk. Only as of episode 4, I'd argue it is Berserk again. The dialogue was very much focused on analyzing Guts' character and his conflict alongside giving some dark but interesting characterization to the priest. I thought the ambush could have been handled better in terms of explaining why the crowd charged at the knights. I didn't like the info dumping, but that's not a really big issue since the purpose of the story and their backstory was for the characterization of the cult. The animation was for the most part in 2D in episode 4, which is always a nice thing, but even when it was in 3D, it was still fluid. In previous episodes, the 3D has been fairly choppy, but aesthetically it has not looked that bad for the most part. It has a really difficult job of conveying facial expressions. If I had to say there was one huge problem with Berserk 2016, I'd say it's the terrible camera work. You can't even see what's going on during half the fights, but aside from that, Berserk 2016 is fine. It's not good, but it's not the worst show airing this season. Stop crying and over-exaggerating and putting it on the same level as shows as Mirai Nikki. Like I said, I'll make a separate video for more elaborate thoughts on Berserk some other time. While I haven't watched episode 3, I can easily say that Konobi Jutsubu is worth your time if you haven't started it. It's very easy to watch, and while it's not as funny as something as like Mob Psycho per se, it surely has its own highlights. If there was one thing I'd have to say is holding Bijutsubu back from being a good comedy, it would be the overuse of jokes. The waifu thing was funny for about 12 minutes, but any longer than that, you begin to make that a character's only defining trait. I feel as if the second episode was to prevent the audience from thinking Subaru is just in the story to draw a waifu and instead make the audience realize that he is actually a person. The funniest part I'd say so far is the pedophile scene, but the show has many more highlights than just that. There's not much to say here. The show looks very nice and the comedy is well written. If the jokes become less repetitive, it'll be a good comedy, but for now it's go give the show a watch if you haven't seen it, though. I don't think you'll be wasting your time. There's no harm in trying it. And that's all I have for this video. I could talk about Taboo Tattoo, but I wouldn't say it falls under the category of good or above average. It's an average show that's fun as hell to watch because the action scenes are awesome and the comedy is absolutely hilarious. Bluesy is bae, and it feels like an early 2000s shonen. Fun show, but it's not good and thus doesn't warrant a section in this overview. Although, I guess I just kind of gave it one, didn't I? Whatever. Anyways, that's what I think about summer so far. It's a very fun season, and it's very reminiscent of last summer. The difference is, however, that we already have a phenomenal show airing right now in ReZero to help the season out, and as a result, there's more good this season than summer of 2015. Where most of the shows were just average at the beginning, but showed promise and then train wrecked very hard. Summer has a lot of shows that started off fairly well, and each show is very competent in achieving what it's aiming for. Not a great season, but it's certainly better than the shithole that was spring, so yeah, thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys later. Deuces.